When the United States of America determined to open up its embassy, and that was President Trump's decision at the end of the day, when he decided to do that, he didn't do it for Israel, and he didn't do it in order to upset Jordan. He did it for the United States of America. And the fact that each consecutive president from 1995 until President Trump did not follow the law demonstrated that we were not a true superpower.
Aryeh Lightstone, my good friend, former colleague from the Trump administration. Thank you so much for joining me on Global Perspectives.
Ellie, I've been a big fan, not just of yours, but of the show as well. And I'm so excited to be here. And it's great to reconnect with both a good colleague and a great friend.
Well, thank you again. It's really wonderful to have you on. On June 28th, Aryeh, you are sharing a book with the world called Let My People Know. And I read the book cover to cover. I thought it was fascinating. Your voice came through, and it was an incredible telling of what I would call the Trump administration's greatest foreign policy achievements, whether it was strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship to heights never known before, or achieving peace in the Middle East. And I want to take us to your description. In the book, you describe a moment that was perhaps one of the most significant in your time in office. You're sitting in the office of the President of the United States as he's about to hold a historic phone call with Israel's Prime Minister and the United Arab Emirates Crown Prince. Tell us about it.
So the call, sort of came together really by 6-7 people maximum. I'm pleased I was probably in the top 10 of the people who were then informed to be in the Oval Office for that call. If you'll remember back to that extremely exciting and tense time, August, September, October, where every Friday, more or less, another normalization or peace partner was announced, the deal had already been done because there wasn't space to negotiate publicly with allies. We wanted to do it privately where they would have space to be able to think and to contemplate and to lead their countries the way they wanted to lead their countries. So I was very honored to be included in the Oval Office, led obviously by President Trump and with Jared and the Secretary and Avi and Ambassador Friedman. And in that room, sort of like this call, we tried to sign on at the right time, and this person's got an internet issue and that person's got a this, and connecting a call of three major world leaders with all the security components that exist. It's actually connecting a call, which is actually pretty entertaining to see that happen. And then the call happened, and believe it or not, it's the same exact thing that happens when we have conference calls. This person is speaking, in this case, the president, and the prime minister wanted to say something. The crown prince, his honor, now the president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, wanted to speak. And sometimes they spoke with each other, and sometimes they spoke over each other. And just sort of that piece of these world leaders who are shaping a new region are also mortals. They're also human beings who are also have the challenges during COVID of a conference call and how that works. And to sort of be in the Oval Office at that moment with the President of the United States of America, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, and for that call to end, it's the part that I'll remember most about that moment was the silence after the president hung up the phone. There was this like aura in the air, the mystique in the air. And I think at that moment, it sort of dawned on everybody that what had happened was larger than anybody involved. And the ramifications in a positive way had not even been contemplated fully yet. It was truly an awe-inspiring moment.
And in fact, Aryeh, it was a moment that changed history for the good in the Middle East, North Africa region. So this is the historic call that gelled what became the Abraham Accords, the first peace deals between Israel and Arab neighbors in 23 years at the time. And so tell me a little bit about the lead up to this phone call. What's incredible about what you describe in Let My People Know is the flurry of diplomatic activity. And you were right there involved in some of the negotiations and certainly involved in every step of the way way. So tell us a little bit about what maybe are some of the moments that stay with you the most during the lead up to the Abraham Accords.
So there's so many moments. It's difficult to pinpoint one or two, but I'll tell you this very clearly. Played a critical role in those moments. And what I mean by that is, as the representative of the United States of America fighting anti Semitism, you did one thing and your office did one thing incredibly powerfully and clearly, which said, we will not tolerate anti Semitism. We don't care what form that comes in, not anti Semitism, not anti Zionism. And we, as the United States of America, are going to speak clearly. And that, coupled with what Ambassador Friedman and Jared Kushner did regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship, and Secretary Pompeo and so many others. Every time I open my mouth, there are 50 other people that should get an enormous amount of credit. By strengthening that relationship, what it did was it pivoted the entire thought process of the foreign policy wonks on its head. And what I mean by that, leading up to President Trump's inauguration, the prevailing theory of the United States of America was, if you could solve the Israeli-Palestinian, quote, crisis, you can solve everything else in the Middle East. And what that means is that Israel is the root of the problems of the Middle East. And basically what happened on day number one, Israel became the solution of the ills of the Middle East. Israel is our number one ally in the Middle East, and we let everybody know that it was our number one ally. So whether it was on December 6, 2017, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and I had the distinct honor of sitting in Ambassador Friedman's home when that speech was made, or on May 14th, 2018, when the embassy was opened in Jerusalem, the U.S. embassy was open in Jerusalem. That wasn't a message. Here, it's incredibly important for your audience to understand this. That was not a gift for the Israelis. That was a gift to the American people. It was the American embassy put in the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. And us doing that demonstrated American strength and clarity of thought that every American so desperately wants. I think we're all feeling that during these trying times. We want America to lead. We want America to be strong. We want America to be decisive. And the same thing goes when you and Elon and others stood strongly and proudly against anti-Semitism. We again took Israel and the Jewish people out of being the, quote, problem in the Middle East and put them there as a solution. And if you look at the other end of that, the United Arab Emirates, my goodness, is that a beacon of light in a crazy, dysfunctional Middle East? Look at what they've built over their 50 years of existence. Look at the opportunities that exist there. And if we can engage both of our allies, the State of Israel, our greatest ally in the region, and the United Arab Emirates, a very critical ally of ours, and have them work together, how much stronger are we as the United States of America?
Incredibly so, and so first of all, I have to. You're very kind in what you're saying about our administration's policies on anti-Semitism, which in our office we were implementing, which was that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and that came from the very top, from President Trump on down. And in your book, Aryeh, you talk about all the figures in the administration: President Trump, Vice President Pence, Secretary Pompeo, Senior Advisor Jared Kushner. The list kind of goes on. Ambassador Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. The list goes on. And do you think that, as they say in D.C., it was also our success in our foreign policy? Do you think it was a bit that personnel makes policy?
Well, it is absolutely personnel makes policy, but here's what I tried to let my people know in the book, is that being pro-Israel is not a bug of the U.S. system, it's a feature. You cannot be pro-United States of America without being pro-Israel. And from the very top, from President Trump down to me, the senior advisor at our embassy in Israel, we all wore it as a badge, because this is what it means to have an America First policy. It is what it means to support the United States of America and our allies in such a robust way. A country like Israel, which pound for pound trades intel with us, defense with us, economics with us, food security, COVID relief, all of these things. Believe me, that in Taiwan, they see what our policies are towards the state of Israel. In Ukraine, they see what our policies are towards the state of Israel, and they use that as a litmus test. And people make policies, but the people who were hired by the America First president were people that agreed with the policy of this just makes sense. And it was so refreshing to just do the right thing. And that's ultimately what we did. And we worked hard. I mean, I remember we worked 20-hour days. And please don't accept that as a complaint. Please accept that as I wish I could work 24-hour days. There was so much to do. And it was the most enjoyable job I could ever imagine, especially from August 13th, 2020 until January 20th, when it was my job not to design the Abraham Accords, but to implement them during the times of COVID, during the times of enormous challenges, electoral upheaval, both in Israel and in the United States of America, to be able to push this once in a generation opportunity for true Middle East peace as fast and as quick and as effectively as possible. I really wish I did not need to sleep at all during those 123 days.
And in Let My People Know, you describe that time period, Aryeh. You talk about everything from the powerfully symbolic, like senior advisor Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and others coming to Israel in order to take the first direct flights ever to the United Arab Emirates, El Al flights, I should say, and to Morocco, to Bahrain, to the nitty gritty of being holed up in the St. Regis Hotel and pounding out MOUs. Tell us a little bit about that time period and what was the mood among your colleagues from these other countries that previously didn't have relations with each other?
So, sort of three different parts. Number one is it's a possibility that had we started this at the beginning of the administration or been in this position at the beginning of the administration, perhaps the urgency wouldn't have been so demanding. And it was the fact that we all knew we were on a shot clock, that there literally was no rest. There was not a day off. I know when I turned off my phone before the Sabbath and sent my last email, that I was going to be working all through the night, Saturday night, to catch up with my colleagues in UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, Kosovo, etc. And the momentum was so obvious that nobody thought it was work. It was, I don't want to say it was pure enjoyment, but it was pure satisfaction. There was the feeling that we were part of something historic. And that's exactly what the moment was like when we landed with the Israeli and US delegation on the El Al flight in Abu Dhabi. Uh, there wasn't a half a second of jet lag. There wasn't a half a second of I need to refresh. There was let's get immediately into the negotiations. And then we get into the room at the negotiations. You've got the Israelis on one side of the table, you have the Emiratis on the other side of the table, and you have me and other representatives of the United States of America sitting at the heads of these various tables. And then it was like a very awkward first date. There was enormous enthusiasm to be there, but what's first? How do you go from 0 to 100 in a very short period of time? No visa relationships, no overflight relationships, no COVID relationships, food security. Our phones didn't work in the UAE and vice versa. So just down to those nitty gritties of how do you communicate, how do you have that sensitivity was there. And the job of the United States of America was not to force or coerce, but it was to facilitate in between two and ultimately five great allies how we could advance as best as possible. Because as I tried to articulate, peace in the Middle East is not a Republican ideal, it's not a Democratic ideal, it's absolutely an American ideal. And every member of the administration did what they could in order to continue the promotion and accelerate the promotion.
It was a time in my life that I'm never going to forget, and so I can only imagine how it was for you, Aryeh, as you were involved again in changing the direction of the Middle East for the better. Aryeh, we spoke earlier. We kind of referenced the United States decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, but I'd like for us to just before we move on from it, just to go back to that moment. Tell me a little bit about the decision making around it. When I've heard President Trump talk about when he was considering making the move and how he was fielding calls from international leaders, everybody was literally telling him the world would come to an end if he made this decision. From your perspective, sitting in the embassy at the time in Tel Aviv, what was happening, and what was that like when the announcement came that the U.S. was actually going to move the embassy to Jerusalem?
What I can tell you is what it was like on day number one, talking to the embassy staff, who were then told that we were going to open up an embassy in Jerusalem and what it meant to them. and then speaking to the Israelis and what it meant to them, and speaking to our colleagues in Jordan and Egypt and Lebanon and what it meant to them. And it was just a mind shift. And I think this is really important to know. When the United States of America determined to open up its embassy, and that was President Trump's decision at the end of the day, when he decided to do that, he didn't do it for Israel, and he didn't do it in order to upset Jordan. He did it for the United States of America. It was a law on our books since 1995, the famous Jerusalem Embassy Act. And the fact that each consecutive president from 1995 until President Trump did not follow the law demonstrated that we were not a true superpower. Why? Because we had our law and our obligation to follow what the people of the United States of America, as represented by their representatives in Washington, D.C., wanted and reaffirmed, and we didn't do that. And the second we didn't do that, what we did, when I say when we didn't do that, when the United States of America continuously did not follow the law of the Jerusalem Embassy Act, we demonstrated that there is a higher power that we answer to, higher than the American people. And the president of the United States of America is elected to represent the American people. And this president took that job incredibly seriously. And he knew that it was in the interest of the United States of America to move our embassy there. And I got to articulate that to our staff, both in our embassy in Tel Aviv, the consulate in Jerusalem. And I was met with enormous amount of consternation and challenges, all the way up from the number 2 in all of these embassies, ambassadors around the Middle East, our ambassadors. But I had the opportunity to be able to explain to them that perhaps they don't fully understand who they represent. And it wasn't a mistake and it wasn't ill will. It was this one decision that I think allowed, for the first time in more than 70 years, the State Department to give itself an honest assessment and say, if we got this wrong, what else could we possibly have gotten wrong? Perhaps
Well,
we're not thinking about this issue as clearly.
and in fact, not only was it the State Department and perhaps the diplomatic class that were proven wrong, but really the entire foreign policy world and many international leaders. What I think is so surprising for us to think about in retrospect is the fact that the embassy was moved. And in fact, the shock was that there was no negative reaction at all. And Aryeh, while we're talking about what's considered the foreign policy wisdom, I want to spend just one moment on the Trump administration's Vision for Peace plan, and also the role that the Palestinian leadership played in rejecting it. In your book, you say the following. You say that there's a prevailing philosophy, and you say, quote, "It isn't fair that Israel is more successful, so it must be pulled down or held to impossible expectations, while the less successful Palestinians are indulged with double standards," unquote. Tell us a bit about your experience and what you're perceiving as a double standard in the way that the Palestinians are dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, the double standard can be explained in a lot of different ways. But the people that are holding the Palestinians back are certainly not the Israelis. It's the Palestinian so-called leadership. And you know who I learned that from? I learned that from the Guatemalans. The Guatemalans moved their embassy to Jerusalem 2 days after we did, on May 16th of 2018. And I turned into the president's wife and said, why are you doing this? Now, granted, to curry favor with our administration, with President Trump's administration, that certainly was of interest to them. But I said, but really, to travel across the world and to take the risk that you have to open up your embassy in Jerusalem? And she said, do you know what they've created here in Israel? From nothing. Literally from nothing. From people who survived the Holocaust and escaped the pogroms from Russia, and immigrants from 80 different countries speaking 15 different languages. They came here to be a superpower of economics, defense, and pride of the country and who they're going to be. Why don't we want some of that? And the Guatemalans said, we want some of that to rub off on us. We want the jobs that are coming out of this country. We want their technological know-how to be net exporters of food and not importers of food. We want what they have. And we looked just literally from where we were standing 150 yards to our left and said, we don't understand why the Palestinians aren't jumping all over this. And the answer is the Palestinians have a narrative, And they're entitled to a narrative, but they're not entitled to a narrative that both is factually inaccurate, but also one that is detrimental to their own people. And the fact is that the entire foreign policy sort of think tank world decided that their narrative is of the utmost value. And therefore, if you're going to try to bring equity to the table, you have to push down Israel instead of elevating the Palestinians. This is what Jared Kushner did on day number one with the Peace to Prosperity conference in Bahrain. He said, I'm calling your bluff. Do you want a better future for your people? And if you do, we're going to get you $50 billion of investment. But in order to get those $50 billion, you have to demonstrate that you're not corrupt, that you're going to have financial transparency. You're not going to pay people based upon how many Jews they kill. Can you do those basic things? And the answer was no, we're going to boycott the conference because the narrative matters more than the reality. And the second we allow that to continue pervasively, you wind up with a people who will never have a better future because the narrative will always win. The Jewish people are not going anywhere. The state of Israel is not going anywhere. It behooves the United States of America to double and triple and quadruple down on that and to get the Palestinians to come to that realization where they can do what Guatemala did, which is to be part of the enormous success that emanates from Israel. I know the Israelis are waiting with open arms. I truly hope that the Palestinians will unclench their fists long enough to be able to shake those hands.
Aryeh, and so what that takes me is to our last question, because I know time is running out. It's believed that the Abraham Accords also, in essence, took away the Palestinian veto on peacemaking in the region. You say in the book that there were about 10 other countries that were in conversation with the Trump administration for normalizing relations with Israel, just as the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and others had done at that moment. What's your outlook on peace and countries that could potentially have these warm peace deals with Israel, just as the Abraham Accords countries did?
So you're saying two things there. I'm going to answer the second one first with your permission. The key here is warm peace. Countries will do what is in their interest to do. And what that means, that's an America first policy. America should do what's in America's interest. Israel should do what's in its interest, and Bahrain should do what's in its interest. And those should be the expectations that we have when we sit down at any table. And that's a great expectation to have because, frankly, it's honest. And we get a lot further with honesty than we do with some of these convoluted policies. So honesty is the best policy. It should be the only policy, frankly. And warm peace will work if there's a peace dividend. And I would encourage the current United States of America to double and triple and quadruple down on the Abraham Accords because they're not a Republican ideal. They're not a Democratic ideal. They're an American ideal. And we should be investing everything we can in their success because if, God forbid, they do not have these peace dividends, if, God forbid, you do not see a benefit from peace, then the alternative is far worse. And I don't know when we're going to get a chance to do this again. However, if you travel around the region, which I know you do, I've done extensively, I'm a little bit more obvious as I walk around the region as an Orthodox Jew who represents the United States of America. But many other people in a lot of these countries don't know that when they first see me. They come and put their arm around my shoulder and say, we can't wait for it to be our turn. And what I like to say, it's a question of when and not if. And the only group that can accelerate that is the United States of America. And the only group that can sort of ruin this once-in-a-generation opportunity is the United States of America. And that's our role and responsibility as the world superpower. And I believe in the United States. I have faith in the United States. I have confidence in the United States. And we are going to get a Middle East that we could not have imagined when we were our children's age. I'm optimistic that our children are going to grow up and see that it is completely and totally second nature for Bahrainis, Emiratis, Israelis, and Moroccans to be sitting together, doing business together, entertaining each other, playing sports with each other, and ultimately creating a more prosperous, successful, and secure Middle East.
It's an incredible vision, and I share with you the hope and optimism that I think all of us have for our children and grandchildren to have this better future available to them. And I certainly hope that the Biden administration will listen to your words and encourage more peace deals in the Middle East. Aryeh Lightstone, thank you so much for joining me on Global Perspectives.
Ellie, thank you. It's a great show, and I really enjoyed catching up with you. We should do it more often.